He learned early that feelings could not pay bills. In the small home where he grew up, talk was always about money, work, and responsibility. Love was not discussed as something important. It was seen as a luxury, something people talked about when their stomachs were full and their future was safe. As a child, he watched adults argue about expenses, about jobs that did not last, about promises that were broken because reality was heavier than words. From those moments, a quiet rule settled into his mind: plan everything, trust effort, and never depend on emotions. He carried that rule into adulthood. Every morning followed a routine: wake up early, eat quickly, leave the house with a clear list of tasks. He believed discipline was the only thing that kept life from falling apart. When others talked about dreams or romance, he listened politely, but never joined in. Inside, he felt distant from those ideas. He thought love made people weak, distracted, and careless. He had seen enough examples to believe that work became his main focus. It was not a job he loved, but it was stable, and stability mattered more than passion. He stayed late when needed and accepted extra duties without complaint. Supervisors trusted him because he did not bring drama into the workplace. He showed up, did his work, and went home. That was enough for him. Some coworkers tried to get closer, inviting him out after work, but he usually found reasons to say no. He told himself that time was better spent improving his skills or resting for the next day. At home, his life was quiet. The room he rented was small but clean. He kept it simple: a bed, a table, a chair, and shelves with neatly arranged items. Nothing unnecessary. He liked it that way. Too many things felt like clutter, and clutter reminded him of chaos. On the wall hung a small calendar where he marked important dates: bills, deadlines, goals. There were no photos of people. Not because he disliked people, but because memories could distract him. Sometimes. Late at night, when the city outside went silent, thoughts crept in. Questions he did not invite. Was this all there was to life? Was he missing something? He usually pushed those thoughts away. Doubt, he believed, was a weakness. He reminded himself of where he came from and how far he had made it on his own. That was proof enough that his way worked. He had watched friends fall in love and fall apart. Promises made quickly, broken even faster. He had helped pick up the pieces, offering practical advice instead of comfort. Deep down, he felt proud that he had avoided such pain. He thought pain was the price of caring too much. So he chose not to care beyond what was necessary. Family responsibilities also shaped him. Even as an adult, he felt the weight of expectations. He was the one others called when something went wrong. He sent money when needed and handled problems without asking for anything in return. Love, in his mind, was shown through action, not words or affection. That belief made him feel strong, dependable, and in control. When people asked why he was not married or in a relationship, he smiled and said he was focused on his career. It was an answer that stopped further questions. Few people challenged it. In a way, society supported his choice. Success was admired. Emotional distance was often mistaken for maturity. That suited him just fine. Still, there were moments that tested his certainty, like when he saw couples sharing quiet smiles or parents holding their children's hands. He told himself those moments were temporary, that behind them were struggles he could not see. He preferred certainty over chance, plans over feelings. His days continued in this pattern until one ordinary morning when nothing seemed different. The same routine, the same streets, the same thoughts. He did not know that this was the last day of his life as he understood it. Love was never the plan, and he was sure of that. Or so he believed. On that morning, he left home a little earlier than usual. A small change, almost unnoticeable. The air felt heavier, like rain might fall later. He walked with his head down, thinking about tasks waiting for him. He passed familiar faces without really seeing them. His mind was already at work. At the bus stop, people stood close but distant, each lost in their own world. He checked the time and sighed softly. Delays annoyed him. They disrupted his schedule. When the bus arrived, he stepped in, took a seat near the window, and stared outside. The city moved past him in slow motion. Shops opening, workers rushing, life unfolding. He thought about the future he was building. A better job, a bigger place. Financial comfort. Those were his goals. Simple and clear. He believed that once he reached them, peace would follow. Love was not part of that picture. It had never been. As the bus stopped and started, his thoughts drifted briefly to the past, to the child he once was, watching the world with cautious eyes. He remembered promising himself that he would never let life surprise him. Planning was his shield. Control was his safety. He did not notice when someone sat nearby. He did not notice the quiet shift in the air. To him, it was just another day, another step forward on a path he thought he had fully mapped out. That belief, steady and strong, carried him through the morning. He walked into his workplace with the same calm confidence he always had, greeted colleagues with a nod, sat at his desk, opened his files. The rhythm of work wrapped around him like armor. He did not know that something small had already begun to change. Not loudly, not suddenly. Just a slight crack in the plan he trusted so deeply. A change that would not announce itself right away. A change that would grow slowly, quietly, and patiently. For now, he was still the same person. Practical, focused, unmoved by emotion. Love was never the plan. And in that moment, he believed the plan was working perfectly. The day began like any other. He followed the routine he had always trusted. Breakfast was quick. Clothes were simple and clean. He left the house with a list of tasks already prepared in his mind. Yet there was something different in the air, though he could not place it. It was subtle, almost invisible. He dismissed the feeling and focused on the day ahead. At work, his day was filled with meetings, paperwork, and phone calls. Each task he completed brought a sense of quiet satisfaction. Discipline had always been his strength, and he relied on it now more than ever. His colleagues moved around him like planets in orbit, but he stayed steady, predictable, reliable. Nothing distracted him. Nothing mattered outside the structure he had built. Then, a new person entered his world without warning. They were assigned to a project together. It was not planned, not expected, and certainly not wanted. He noticed them immediately, of course, because the world has a way of making the unexpected visible even to those who claim to ignore it. They were efficient, confident, and spoke with a calm authority that matched his own dedication. There was no flash of romance or dramatic presence, just an undeniable sense of awareness that this person would matter in ways he could not yet understand. At first, he kept distance. Personal interactions were limited to professional needs. He reminded himself that closeness was a distraction. Work was important. Ambitions were important. Feelings were unnecessary. Still, he found himself noticing small things. How they listened intently during meetings. The way they stayed late to finish tasks without complaint. A quiet patience that mirrored his own. He did not understand why these observations made him feel something he had always avoided: curiosity. A sense of interest, an awareness that lingered in the corners of his mind. The project required cooperation. Slowly, he found himself sharing ideas, discussing solutions, and debating approaches. Their mind worked differently, yet complemented his own. Solutions came faster, decisions were better, and progress felt smoother. He respected their intelligence and clarity. That respect, practical at first, began to grow into something deeper. He did not name it. He refused to. He simply noticed it, as one might notice the changing weather or the quiet. Turning of the seasons, lunch hours became moments of subtle observation. They would speak softly, sharing stories from past experiences, sometimes personal, sometimes professional. He learned small details about their life, not enough to form attachment, but enough to understand the rhythms and patterns that made them who they were. He reminded himself constantly, focus on work, keep boundaries. Love is not part of this plan, yet some moments defied the plan. a laugh shared over a minor mistake in the project, a thoughtful comment on a problem he had struggled to solve alone, the subtle encouragement that made him try again. These moments lingered longer than they should have. He felt a warmth in the chest that he had long ignored in himself. He tried to dismiss it, to classify it as mere friendliness, but it stayed persistent, gentle, and undeniable, even outside work. Their presence began to shape his thoughts. He thought about conversations they had shared. He wondered what they might do on a weekend, what books they might read, what music they might listen to. Thoughts he had avoided for years now entered his mind uninvited. He did not welcome them, but he also could not push them away. It was a strange sensation, confusing and new. People around him noticed subtle changes. Colleagues commented that he seemed lighter, quieter, yet more focused in a strange way. He ignored their remarks. They did not understand. He did not understand. Everything was fine, he told himself. Nothing had changed. Love was never the plan. The unexpected moments continued. A shared coffee in the morning when both arrived early. A walk to pick up materials from another building. A quiet exchange of thoughts on a problem they solved together. Small gestures that slowly formed a pattern of connection. He felt a conflict he had never felt before. Work was still important. Life was still structured. Yet, this person had become a part of his thoughts, slipping into the spaces he had carefully kept empty. At night, after returning home, he reflected on the day. The familiar routine continued, yet he noticed his mind lingered on moments he would normally have dismissed. He caught himself smiling at small memories of the day. He tried to rationalize it. Efficiency and teamwork, appreciation for competence, nothing more. But deep down, he felt the stirrings of something he had always avoided. Curiosity, interest, and a subtle emotional pull that refused to be ignored. He could not place it. He could not name it. And yet it was there. Quiet, unassuming, persistent. A presence that was not planned, not wanted, yet undeniable. Love was still not the plan, but the plan was quietly shifting, almost imperceptibly, in ways he could not yet understand. The day ended like any other in routine. He returned to his small apartment, prepared a simple meal, and organized his notes for the next day. Yet in the quiet of the evening, he found himself recalling moments with them. Moments that were ordinary, small, and yet powerful in a way he could not explain. His mind lingered on a smile, a kind word, a shared solution. It was subtle, unthreatening, yet persistent. He tried to sleep, as he always did, setting his alarm for the same early hour. But sleep was restless. Thoughts returned, circling around a presence that had entered his life without permission. Questions he had never asked himself before emerged. Why did their presence feel important? Why did he care about their opinion? Why did he feel something that had no place in his structured, planned life? Morning would come, and he would wake to the same routine, same streets, same work. But now, the world had a new element. Something unplanned, unpredictable, and quietly powerful. Love was still not the plan. But it had quietly begun to write its own chapter in the story of his life. Days turned into weeks, and the presence of this new person continued to grow in his life. He tried to keep it all professional, as he always had. Rules and plans had guided him successfully for so long, and he trusted them. Yet the closer he worked with this person, the more he felt his control slipping, like sand running slowly through his fingers. Every meeting, every shared task, every small discussion left a subtle mark on him. He noticed their quiet determination, their calm and stressful moments, their unexpected laughter at small things. These were not dramatic or loud gestures. They were small, human, and persistent. At first he resisted noticing, convinced he could maintain his usual distance. But the mind has a way of noticing what the heart refuses to admit. He began to question things he had never questioned before. Why did he look forward to seeing them? Why did he think about them outside of work hours? Why did a small compliment from them feel weighty, meaningful, and somehow rare? These questions made him uneasy, because he had always believed that emotion and planning were separate, that feelings had no place in a life built carefully and deliberately. late at night. When the apartment was quiet, he found himself replaying moments from the day. A brief smile in the hallway, a shared joke over a project mistake, a look of understanding when he had struggled with a difficult decision. Each memory was like a tiny flame, growing slowly, warming a part of him he had kept cold for so long. He tried to suppress these feelings, telling himself they were unnecessary distractions. Still, they persisted. He began to see subtle patterns in their behavior that he could not ignore. They were reliable, yes, but also thoughtful in ways that went beyond work. They remembered details about colleagues, about past conversations, about small personal preferences. They did not force their opinions, yet their presence brought clarity and calm. He found himself admiring these qualities, first intellectually, then emotionally. And the realization that he admired them in this way frightened him. Even routine workdays became moments of internal conflict. During meetings, he noticed how his thoughts would drift, how he paid attention not just to ideas, but to the way they expressed them, how they nodded, how they spoke, how they considered others' opinions. Every gesture, every word, became something he analyzed quietly, not wanting to admit to himself that it mattered in a way it never had before. Friends noticed a subtle change in him. He was quieter in some ways, but more alert in others. He seemed less rigid, though he never spoke of why. They joked that perhaps he was softening, that perhaps someone had broken through his armor. He laughed politely, but dismissed it as mere coincidence. After all, he told himself, love was not the plan. This could not be love. It was too soon, too irrational, too unpredictable. He began to experience small moments of hesitation. Should he take a call at work, knowing it would interrupt their shared task? Should he offer help, even when it might delay his own schedule? Small choices that once would have been automatic now carried an emotional weight. He was aware of their presence even when they were not there. He noticed when they arrived late, when they seemed tired, when they smiled. Every detail became significant, and he struggled with the realization that his focus was no longer entirely on work. At home, his thoughts were restless. He found himself thinking of them in quiet moments, imagining how they might spend an evening, what they might enjoy, how they might react to a story he wanted to share. He chastised himself for these thoughts, trying to redirect his mind to practical matters, bills, tasks, routines. Yet the thoughts would not leave. They were persistent, gentle, undeniable. He began to question his own principles. Was it really wrong to care? Was it really weakness to feel? He had long believed that emotion was a distraction, that attachment led to vulnerability. And yet, he could not deny that these feelings brought a new depth to his life. A quiet awareness, a sense of connection, a subtle joy that he had never experienced in his structured existence. It was confusing, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. Even during small interactions, he noticed a shift. When they asked a question, he wanted to give more than just a practical answer. When they seemed unsure, he felt an urge to reassure, to protect, to be present in ways he had never thought necessary. He caught himself smiling when they praised a solution or acknowledged his effort. It was a feeling he had long dismissed as weakness, yet now he could not ignore it. He realized that his plan, once so rigid and clear, was beginning to shift. The walls he had built around himself were not breaking violently, but gently, almost imperceptibly. This presence in his life had created a crack, a small opening where warmth, curiosity, and care could enter. And for the first time, he faced a challenge he could not solve with logic or discipline. This was not a problem with a clear answer, a predictable outcome, or a step-by-step solution. This was human, real, unpredictable, deeply compelling. He could feel the tension between his old self and this new awareness. One part of him wanted to retreat to focus on plans, tasks, and control. Another part, quieter but persistent, wanted to linger, to notice, to engage. He was aware of this internal conflict in every choice he made, every conversation he had, every moment he spent nearby. And so, life continued in a delicate balance. Workdays passed. Small gestures and interactions accumulated. Thoughts that were once dismissed now held significance. The presence of this person became a quiet, constant force in his life, shaping his days and nights in ways he had never expected. Love was still not the plan, but it was no longer something that could be ignored. It had entered slowly, imperceptibly, persistently, and it was growing. A sudden change disrupted the rhythm he had grown used to. It was not dramatic, not like a catastrophe, but it forced him to face the growing connection he had tried to ignore. A project complication required them to work closely together outside normal hours. Normally, he would have managed it with calm efficiency, but this time, every decision carried emotional weight he had not experienced before. They arrived at the meeting place. A quiet office room empty of distractions. The conversation began with work, charts, and schedules. He focused on the task, but he noticed them more than ever. The way they adjusted papers, the way they paused before speaking, the quiet intensity in their eyes. Each action carried a weight that made his heart beat faster. Though he refused to acknowledge it aloud, hours passed, and with each moment, his awareness grew. He found himself listening not just to words, but to tone, expression, hesitation. Small gestures he once would have ignored now had meaning. When they offered help, he felt gratitude that was more than professional. When they smiled at a solution he suggested, he felt a warmth that surprised him. He tried to focus on the project, tried to stick to the plan, tried to maintain control. But the human element, the connection he had resisted, was undeniable. Outside work, he felt its presence even more. Every notification, every small message, every mention of their name brought thoughts he could not easily dismiss. He reflected on past experiences, on principles he had lived by, and questioned them quietly. Was it truly wrong to care? Was vulnerability really weakness? These questions disturbed his calm, but also stirred something he had never expected: curiosity about what life could be like beyond plans and schedules. They shared quiet conversations over coffee during breaks. Each talk was casual, almost mundane, but to him, it became precious. Stories of their past, subtle hints about personal hopes and fears, reflections on small failures and victories, all these were unplanned, yet slowly shaping a new understanding within him. He found himself listening more intently, thinking carefully about his words, and feeling a desire to connect beyond the professional boundaries. He had always maintained this change did not happen all at once. It was a gradual awareness, like the first light of dawn spreading across a dark horizon. He caught himself anticipating these moments, noticing when they might appear, imagining scenarios where he might speak with them. These thoughts were gentle at first, then persistent. They forced him to examine a side of himself he had long ignored: the need for connection, the ability to feel deeply, the capacity for trust. One evening, as the office emptied and the city lights flickered outside, they stayed behind to finish an urgent task. The conversation shifted from work to life outside these walls. He shared small personal thoughts he had never voiced before. They responded with attention and understanding. Not judgment, not criticism, just presence. In that quiet exchange, he felt a trust forming, delicate yet undeniable. The realization hit him that the bond he had denied was real, significant, and capable of affecting his carefully built life. He struggled with this realization. His internal dialogue was intense. He reminded himself of his goals, the plan he had followed for years. Yet, this connection brought a clarity he could not ignore. It showed him a different dimension of life, where trust, care, and emotional awareness mattered as much as discipline and success. He wrestled with the tension between comfort and routine, and the unpredictable nature of feelings. Small incidents continued to test him. A shared laugh over a mistake, a quiet compliment on his approach, a moment of mutual understanding during a stressful situation. All these interactions carried emotional weight. He found himself smiling quietly to himself, replaying moments, analyzing responses, and feeling an unexpected joy. For the first time, he experienced an emotional depth that was not planned, structured, or predictable. Even his friends noticed changes. He was more reflective, less rigid, yet more alert and engaged. They commented on a subtle lightness in his demeanor, a quiet enthusiasm they had not seen before. He dismissed it outwardly, but internally he knew that something profound was happening. He could no longer ignore the truth. The connection he had resisted was shaping him, challenging his beliefs, and altering his understanding of life. He began considering possibilities he had never entertained. Could he allow himself to care more openly? Could he trust someone with his time, thoughts, and emotions without fear? Could he integrate this bond into his structured life without losing his sense of self? These questions were unsettling, yet exhilarating. They forced him to acknowledge vulnerability as part of human experience, rather than a weakness. As the week progressed, circumstances required him to make choices that were no longer purely logical. Decisions about time, attention, and priorities were colored by consideration for them. The balance he had maintained between life and work, routine and control, is now influenced by an emotional awareness he had long denied. He felt a tension between adherence to plans and responsiveness to feelings, a tension that demanded courage and reflection. By the end of this period, he understood that a defining moment was approaching. A choice would soon be necessary, one that could either integrate this new presence into his life or keep it at a distance. The awareness of what was at stake brought a mix of fear and anticipation. For the first time in years, he felt uncertain about the outcome. Aware that the resolution could change the trajectory of his carefully mapped life, the realization settled in, quietly. Love was no longer just a distraction, an inconvenience, or a weakness. It was a force that demanded attention, reflection, and decision. The connection he had resisted was significant, shaping his days, influencing his choices, and awakening emotions he had long suppressed. He felt both the weight and the possibility of this awareness, knowing that soon a choice would need to be made, one that could redefine his understanding of life, happiness, and personal fulfillment. The moment of decision arrived quietly, without warning or grand announcement. It was not a dramatic scene with music swelling or hearts racing in the way movies often portray. It was ordinary, subtle, yet monumental in its implications. He realized that the connection he had resisted for so long could not be ignored any longer. The presence of this person, their patience, their understanding, their quiet insistence on authenticity, had forced him to confront feelings he had always denied. The choice was not simple. On one side lay the life he had meticulously planned, stability, structure, and control. On the other side lay uncertainty, emotional vulnerability, and the possibility of a profound connection that defied his previous logic. He reflected on the years he had spent avoiding these questions, believing that emotions were obstacles to a well-ordered life. Now he understood that denying them had limited him, kept him from experiencing the fullness of life. In the days leading up to his decision, he observed small, ordinary moments with heightened awareness. The way they laughed at a minor error, the way they considered others' feelings without losing their own perspective, the quiet confidence in the way they approached challenges. Each detail reminded him that life was not only about plans and outcomes, but also about presence, connection, and shared experiences. These realizations were subtle, yet they carried weight he could no longer ignore. He considered the risks. Opening his life to emotional attachment could disrupt routines, create vulnerabilities, and challenge his independence. It could lead to disappointment or heartache. But the potential rewards were equally real: trust, companionship, understanding, and the simple joy of shared moments. For the first time, he weighed these possibilities not as abstract concepts, but as real experiences he could choose to embrace. The decision did not come in a single dramatic instant. It was a process of reflection, observation, and internal conversation. He thought about his past, the lessons learned from hardships, and the strength gained from independence. He considered his present, the subtle yet undeniable influence this person had on his life, and the ways he had already begun to change without fully realizing it. He envisioned a future, uncertain yet filled with possibility, where connection could coexist with structure, and care could enhance rather than diminish his independence. One evening, as the city lights blinked outside the window, he found himself alone in quiet contemplation. He replayed moments from the past weeks and months, noticing how his responses had shifted. Small gestures that had once seemed insignificant now carried deep meaning. Conversations that had seemed routine now felt rich with understanding. He realized that the presence of this person had already transformed his life. Even before any formal acknowledgement or declaration, he remembered how he had once dismissed emotional awareness as a distraction. Now, he recognized it as a guide. Feelings, he understood, were not obstacles to planning, but signals of significance, calling attention to what truly mattered. Trust, care, and shared experience were not weaknesses. They were components of a life fully lived. This awareness was both humbling and empowering. The following day, he made a choice. It was quiet, deliberate, and grounded in sincerity. He allowed himself to engage fully with the presence that had become central to his life. He did not force declarations or dramatics. Instead, he acted with authenticity, openness, and careful attention. The connection was embraced not as a distraction, but as an integral part of his evolving understanding of life, responsibility, and fulfillment. In the weeks that followed, their interactions deepened. Shared tasks, conversations, and moments of mutual support became richer. He found joy in listening, learning, and being present. He discovered that vulnerability, far from being a weakness, fostered resilience and authenticity. He laughed more freely, reflected more openly, and experienced a depth of emotion he had long denied himself. Friends and colleagues noticed subtle changes. He was more attentive, patient, and emotionally aware. He carried himself with a calm confidence. Not because he had regained control over life's variables, but because he had learned to navigate uncertainty with presence and care. The connection had transformed him quietly, reshaping his approach to relationships, work, and self-awareness. He also discovered moments of challenge. Emotional awareness brought responsibilities of understanding, compromise, and empathy. He faced situations where patience, honesty, and active listening were necessary. Yet, these moments once feared became opportunities for growth. Each challenge strengthened his connection, not only with the other person, but with himself. Time passed, and he reflected on the journey. Love had entered his life without warning, without a plan, and without ceremony. It had challenged assumptions, expanded his perspective, and reshaped priorities. Yet, it had also revealed a fundamental truth. The most meaningful aspects of life often cannot be scheduled, predicted, or controlled. They emerge quietly and persistently, inviting engagement, presence, courage. He understood that love was not the plan, but it was no longer irrelevant. It had taught him that planning and care, discipline and connection, structure and vulnerability could coexist. He saw that life's richness emerged not from avoiding uncertainty, but from engaging fully with it, with awareness, integrity, and openness. The presence that had once seemed disruptive now felt natural, essential, profoundly meaningful. In quiet moments, he acknowledged the transformation within himself. The walls he had built around emotions had softened. He no longer feared the vulnerability he had once avoided. Instead, he embraced it as part of a life lived fully. The connection he had resisted had become a source of insight, strength, and joy. He understood that the journey had not been about losing control, but about gaining awareness, perspective, and depth. Love, he realized, was not about dramatic declarations or sudden passion. It was about presence, understanding, and shared experience. It was about noticing the small details, valuing the ordinary moments, and being present with authenticity. It was about growth, reflection, and the courage to engage with life beyond plans and predictability. As the story reached its quiet resolution, he felt a sense of balance. The life he had built with discipline and planning remained intact, enriched by the depth of connection he had learned to embrace. He moved forward with awareness, presence, and openness, understanding that the unplanned could teach lessons the carefully scheduled could not. Love had entered his life quietly, persistently, and profoundly, and he had chosen to meet it with sincerity, courage, and care. Time passed, and the connection that had quietly grown between them became an integral part of his life. He had long resisted the pull of emotion, believing that love and attachment could interfere with his carefully planned existence. Yet now, he realized that this bond was not a distraction. It was a new layer of understanding, a deeper awareness that added meaning and richness to his life. He noticed the subtle ways their presence influenced him. Even small interactions carried weight. A shared smile, a thoughtful question, a brief moment of empathy, these simple things now shaped his days. Work remained important, responsibilities continued, and plans still guided him. But they were now interwoven with the quiet understanding that human connection could not be scheduled, controlled, or predicted. It had to be acknowledged and embraced. Morning routines continued, but they felt lighter. Coffee shared before starting the day, brief exchanges of encouragement, and silent moments of recognition were no longer trivial. He found himself listening more attentively, speaking more openly, and appreciating nuances he had long overlooked. The presence of this person had sharpened his awareness, not only of others, but of himself. He reflected on how much he had grown, how much he had allowed space for emotions he once feared. Work remained structured and demanding. Deadlines, meetings, and responsibilities occupied his mind, yet they no longer defined the totality of his life. The balance he had always sought now included moments of presence, care, and shared understanding. He recognized that these elements, once ignored, were essential for a fulfilling life. They were not disruptions. They were complements to discipline and focus. Challenges arose, as they always do. Situations required difficult conversations, compromises, and careful navigation of emotions. He faced moments of vulnerability where patience, honesty, and empathy were tested. Yet, he approached these challenges differently. He no longer saw them as weaknesses, but as opportunities to deepen understanding, strengthen bonds, and grow as a person. Each interaction reinforced the importance of presence and attentiveness. He reflected on his past, recalling how he had avoided emotional engagement, believing that independence and control were paramount. Now he recognized that this avoidance had limited his experiences, narrowed his perspective, and muted a part of himself that longed for connection. The realization was humbling, yet empowering. He could integrate this awareness into his life, enriching it without sacrificing structure or responsibility. Small moments became profound. A shared laugh over a minor mistake, a quiet conversation about life outside work, and gestures of support during stressful situations all carried a depth that he had not previously understood. These interactions were not dramatic, yet they were transformative. They allowed him to experience life with a new sensitivity, to value the ordinary, to appreciate the subtleties of human connection. As weeks turned into months, he noticed changes within himself. He was more patient, more reflective, more willing to pause and consider perspectives beyond his own. He discovered joy in listening, in offering support, and in understanding without judgment. These qualities, once dormant, emerged as strengths. They complemented his existing discipline and focus, creating a more holistic approach to life that balanced ambition with empathy. Friendships deepened, too. He shared insights and experiences he had previously kept private. Conversations were richer, more nuanced, and more meaningful. He realized that emotional openness did not weaken his relationships. It strengthened them. Trust, understanding, and shared vulnerability became foundations for deeper connections, both personal and professional. He also observed the growth in the other person. Their patience, understanding, and subtle support were constant reminders of the value of care, attention, and presence. Together, they navigated challenges, celebrated successes, and learned from setbacks. The relationship was not without difficulty, but the difficulties became opportunities for mutual growth and deeper understanding. In quiet moments, he reflected on the journey. He remembered how he had once believed that love was a distraction, a threat to stability. He realized that this perspective had been incomplete. Emotional engagement, when approached with awareness and sincerity, could coexist with planning, responsibility, and independence. It did not diminish his life. It enhanced it. The realization brought a sense of peace. He no longer feared vulnerability, uncertainty, or emotional depth. He embraced the connection he had once resisted, recognizing its transformative power. Life had become richer, more nuanced, and more fulfilling. He understood that true fulfillment was not only about achieving goals, but also about being present, caring deeply, and engaging authentically with others. Even ordinary routines now carried meaning. Morning coffee, shared meals, quiet walks, and small acts of kindness became sources of joy and connection. He noticed the beauty in everyday interactions, the significance in gestures that might once have seemed trivial. Life had expanded, encompassing both structure and emotion, discipline and care. He also discovered a renewed sense of self-awareness. Emotions no longer controlled him. They informed him. He learned to navigate feelings with clarity, balancing them with logic, responsibility, and intention. This awareness allowed him to engage fully, respond thoughtfully, and act with integrity in both personal and professional spheres. As the story continued, he embraced the unplanned aspects of life. He recognized that growth, connection, and fulfillment often emerged from experiences that could not be scheduled or controlled. Love, friendship, and shared understanding became integral parts of his life, enhancing his sense of purpose, resilience, and joy in the quiet reflection of evening. He acknowledged the transformation within himself. He had moved from a life defined solely by plans, schedules, and control to one enriched by presence, care, and emotional awareness. The journey had been gradual, subtle, and persistent, but the impact was profound. Love, once unplanned and resisted, had become a guiding force, shaping his choices, deepening his connections, and expanding his understanding of what it meant to live fully. Through this ongoing process, he realized that life's richness lay in embracing both the planned and the unexpected. Structure provided stability, discipline ensured progress, and responsibility guided decisions. But connection, presence, and care brought depth, meaning, and fulfillment. The integration of these elements created a life that was balanced, resilient, and deeply human. He understood that the journey was continuous. Challenges, uncertainties, and moments of vulnerability would continue to arise. Yet, he was prepared to navigate them with awareness, integrity, and openness. The unplanned would continue to teach, guide, and transform. Love, in its quiet, persistent way, had shown him that life's most meaningful experiences often emerge when we allow ourselves to engage fully, embrace uncertainty, and connect authentically with others. As he looked forward, he felt a sense of anticipation, hope, and acceptance. The connection he had once resisted was now a source of strength, insight, and joy. Life, enriched by both planning and presence, was expansive and full of possibility. He moved forward with clarity, courage, and an openness to the experiences that awaited. Knowing that the unplanned could bring the deepest lessons and the greatest fulfillment, life continued, each day unfolding with a rhythm that was both familiar and quietly transformed. The connection that had entered his life gradually became a presence that shaped not only his days, but also his understanding of himself. He had once believed that life could be fully planned, that emotions were distractions to be managed and contained. Now he realized that emotions, when approached with awareness, added depth, perspective, and meaning to life in ways he had never anticipated. The mornings began much like they had for years. The alarm rang. A small routine of preparation, and the city slowly waking outside his window. Yet, even these familiar routines carried new significance. He found himself looking forward to small interactions, anticipating moments of connection, and feeling a subtle warmth when thinking about shared experiences. Tasks and responsibilities remained important, but they were now accompanied by awareness and appreciation for moments of human presence and shared understanding. Workdays were filled with the usual demands, yet the way he approached them had changed. Meetings, deadlines, and responsibilities were still present, but he found that engaging with the people around him added richness to the process. Collaboration was no longer purely transactional. Conversations, small gestures of kindness, and subtle acknowledgments became meaningful elements that shaped the outcome of his work and his satisfaction with it. He realized that human presence could enhance efficiency, understanding, and creativity, not hinder it. The person who had once been an unexpected presence in his life continued to influence him, not through dramatic gestures, but through consistent understanding, patience, and care. They remained themselves calm, observant, and supportive, but their presence had transformed his awareness. He noticed the quiet ways they anticipated needs, offered encouragement, and demonstrated thoughtfulness. These small acts were powerful because they were genuine and consistent, and they revealed the subtle impact of kindness and attention over time. He reflected on his own responses. He was no longer dismissive of emotions. He was aware of them, processing them with clarity and intention. He listened with attention, responded thoughtfully, and engaged in ways that were authentic and meaningful. He recognized the value of vulnerability, not as weakness, but as an opportunity for connection and growth. Each interaction became an opportunity to understand another person more deeply and to learn more about himself. Challenges arose, as they always do in life. Situations required compromise, patience, and negotiation. At times, he felt uncertainty and discomfort, realizing that human relationships cannot always be managed like tasks with predictable outcomes. Yet, he approached these moments with a newfound courage, understanding that uncertainty was part of the richness of human experience. Difficult conversations and disagreements became opportunities for clarity, empathy, and mutual respect. He also noticed subtle transformations in himself. He was more reflective, more patient, and more capable of holding multiple perspectives at once. He realized that personal growth often arises from experiences that challenge assumptions, provoke reflection, and require adaptation. The presence of this person had been a catalyst for such growth, creating an environment in which he could explore emotions, consider new perspectives, and develop a deeper sense of self-awareness. Outside of work, life was enriched by shared experiences and small moments of connection. Walks through the city, shared meals, and quiet conversations became opportunities for engagement, laughter, and understanding. These moments, though ordinary in appearance, carried significance because of the awareness, attention, and presence he brought to them. He learned to appreciate the ordinary, recognizing that meaningful experiences do not always require drama or grandeur. Often, they are found in simple, consistent, and authentic human interactions. He reflected on his previous beliefs about love and connection. He had once seen emotion as a distraction, vulnerability as weakness, and attachment as a risk. Now he recognized that these perspectives had been limited. Emotional engagement, when approached with sincerity and awareness, was not only compatible with a disciplined, structured life, but enhanced it. Love and care could coexist with responsibility, planning, and personal growth, creating a more holistic and fulfilling life experience. The bond he shared with this person deepened over time, shaped by shared experiences, mutual respect, and consistent understanding. They faced challenges together, navigated differences, and celebrated successes. Each interaction strengthened their connection, not through dramatic declarations, but through persistent presence, attention, and empathy. The relationship became a foundation of stability, trust, and growth. Enhancing his life in ways he had never anticipated, he also discovered the importance of communication and honesty. He had once avoided deep emotional conversations, fearing vulnerability and unpredictability. Now, he embraced them, understanding that clarity, openness, and sincerity were essential for maintaining trust and connection. Difficult topics, moments of misunderstanding, and emotional expressions were no longer threats to stability, but opportunities to strengthen bonds and cultivate mutual understanding. Time passed, and he observed the transformation in himself and in the way he approached life. He was more attuned to subtle emotional cues, more capable of empathy, and more willing to prioritize presence alongside responsibility. He understood that personal fulfillment was not solely about achieving goals or maintaining control, but about engaging authentically with the people and experiences that shaped his life. He noticed the ripple effects of this growth in other areas of his life. Interactions with colleagues became richer, friendships more meaningful, and personal awareness more nuanced. He realized that emotional engagement and attentiveness could enhance professional performance, interpersonal relationships, and overall well-being. The awareness he cultivated through this connection influenced his decisions, priorities, and approach to challenges. Even in moments of solitude, he found himself reflecting on the journey. He considered the contrast between his former life, structured, disciplined, emotionally guarded, in his current existence, enriched by connection, presence, and care. He recognized that meaningful experiences often emerge from unplanned circumstances, persistent awareness, and willingness to engage with vulnerability. Life was no longer a series of tasks to be completed, but a landscape of opportunities for growth, connection, and understanding. He continued to navigate the balance between responsibility and emotional engagement. Work remained structured and demanding, but he integrated awareness, empathy, and attention into his approach. Decisions were informed not only by logic and planning, but also by consideration of human impact, relationships, and emotional context. This integration created a more balanced, thoughtful, and effective approach to both personal and professional life. The presence of this person remained a consistent source of insight, support, and companionship. Their shared experiences, collaborative problem-solving, and quiet understanding reinforced the value of connection and attentiveness. The relationship was not defined by grand gestures, but by persistent presence, consistent care, and mutual respect. It was a reminder that meaningful engagement often arises from ordinary moments approached with awareness and sincerity. He also observed the evolution of his own values and priorities. Independence, responsibility, and discipline remained important, but they were now complemented by care, empathy, and presence. He recognized that a life fully lived required integration of these elements, balancing structured goals with emotional awareness and human connection. He approached each day with a sense of curiosity, attentiveness, and openness to experiences that could not be fully planned or controlled. Moments of challenge continued to arise, requiring patience, clarity, and thoughtful engagement. He faced situations that tested his ability to balance personal goals with relational awareness, yet he approached these challenges with a sense of responsibility and emotional insight. Each challenge became an opportunity for growth, reflection, and deeper understanding of himself and others. He reflected on the lessons learned from the journey. Life was unpredictable, and human connections could not be fully planned. Love, care, and shared understanding emerged through presence, attentiveness, and consistent engagement. Vulnerability was not weakness, but a gateway to deeper insight and meaningful connection. Growth required openness, reflection, and willingness to navigate uncertainty. As months turned into years, he observed the sustained impact of these realizations. The bond he shared with this person continued to provide support, understanding, and insight. Interactions were enriched by awareness, empathy, and mutual respect. Life felt fuller, richer, and more nuanced, shaped not only by planning and discipline, but also by emotional engagement and authentic presence.